Delta Airlines operates over 80 units of an aircraft that Boeing itself abandoned nearly 20 years ago. An aircraft that the entire market considers obsolete, outdated, dead weight. And here's the striking detail. Not only did it maintain this fleet, it increased the number of aircraft. How is this possible? How does the largest airline in the United States profit from a commercial failure that nobody else wants? The answer has nothing to do with the aircraft itself. It has to do with seeing opportunity where everyone else sees only expense. And this vision transformed what seemed like a strategic mistake into a multi-billion-dollar competitive advantage.
Aviate has reached 20,000 subscribers passionate about aviation. Our sincere thanks for your support. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.
The Boeing 717 was born from a miscalculation. When Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas in '97, the transaction brought more than assets and technology. It brought a problematic project called the MD-95. This aircraft was essentially a modernized version of the DC-9, a jet designed in the '60s. Boeing invested in more efficient Rolls-Royce BR-715 engines, upgraded the avionics, redesigned the cockpit, and renamed the aircraft as the 717. They wanted to create a single-aisle jet for short and medium routes that could compete in the 100 to 130-seat segment. The problem was position. It was too small to compete with market giants like the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320, while simultaneously being too large and too expensive to be classified as a regional jet, where aircraft like the Bombardier CRJ and Embraer operated with lower costs. The 717 was stuck in commercial limbo, and the numbers confirmed the failure. In 8 years of production, between '98 and 2006, Boeing sold only 156 units. For context, Boeing sells on average more than 400 units of the 737 per year. The 717 wasn't just weak performance, it was a disaster. In 2006, Boeing made the inevitable decision. It ended production. The market understood the message. Airlines operating the 717 began planning fleet retirement. AirTran had 88 of them. Midwest Airlines operated some. Hawaiian Airlines too. All were waiting for the right moment to replace them with more modern and efficient aircraft. Everyone, except Delta. In 2010, something changed. Southwest Airlines acquired AirTran-Airways, and this merger created a complex operational problem. Southwest had built its entire operational identity around a single aircraft, the Boeing 737. Homogeneous fleet, standardized training, simplified maintenance. This was the core of Southwest's low-cost strategy. AirTran's 88 Boeing 717s didn't fit this philosophy. They were aircraft incompatible with Southwest's operation, and they needed to exit the fleet quickly. Delta saw something nobody else was seeing. While the market saw a problematic and heavily depreciated asset, Delta identified a rare financial arbitrage. Delta didn't buy the aircraft, it assumed the leasing contracts that AirTran maintained with leasing companies. And here's the first strategic move. These contracts had been negotiated years earlier, when the 717 still had some perceived market value. The leasing rates were significantly below what any equivalent aircraft would cost in 2012. A typical leasing contract for the 717 cost between $100,000 and $150,000 per month. An Airbus A220, which would be the natural replacement, would cost over $300,000 per month in leasing. An Embraer E175 would be around $200,000 monthly. Delta was paying less than half the market cost for an aircraft with similar capacity and range. But the advantage didn't stop at leasing. Delta already operated a significant fleet of MD-88 and MD-90, aircraft manufactured by McDonnell Douglas, that shared the same lineage as the 717, and this apparent coincidence created an operational synergy that external analysts couldn't adequately quantify. The Rolls-Royce BR-715 engines of the 717 were a direct evolution of the BR-700 family, already used in other Delta fleet aircraft. The hydraulic systems were practically identical to those of the MD-90. This meant Delta could reduce by approximately 60% the inventory of spare parts needed. There was no need to maintain two complete and independent stocks. A single shared inventory solved the issue. The 717 cockpit was almost identical to the MD-90s. This similarity had direct financial implications. A pilot qualified on the MD-90 needed only 2 weeks of differential training to obtain 717 certification. The cost per pilot was around $5,000. For comparison, a completely new type rating, as would be necessary for an A220 or a new generation 737, would cost over $15,000 per pilot and take 6 to 8 weeks. Delta had hundreds of pilots who would need this transition. The accumulated savings were substantial. Additionally, all ground infrastructure already existed. Maintenance equipment, specialized tools, trained technicians, MRO supplier contracts, all of this was already operational. The 717 didn't require investment in new infrastructure, it simply integrated into the existing system. This operational compatibility transformed what appeared to be an obsolete aircraft into a perfect fit for Delta's structure. But there's an even more important detail in this equation. There's another critical element that explains why the 717 worked for Delta. It filled a specific gap in the route network. Every major airline faces a fleet optimization problem. You need aircraft of different sizes for routes with different demands. Delta had the CRJ-900 with 76 seats for smaller routes. It had the 737-800 with over 160 seats for higher volume routes. But there was an empty space between 100 and 130 seats where Delta didn't have an efficient solution. The 717, with capacity between 110 and 117 passengers, occupied exactly that space. Consider a typical route: Atlanta to Raleigh or Detroit to Columbus, short routes between 300 and 800 nautical miles. Stable demand, but not enough to justify a 737 flying with half its seats empty. If you put a smaller regional jet, it gets saturated and you lose revenue because you can't accommodate all the demand. The 717 was the answer. It operated these routes with high frequency, adequate capacity, and competitive costs. And there's an important technical detail. On short routes, cost per cycle matters more than cost per flight hour. Each takeoff and landing has an associated operational cost: component wear, fuel consumption during taxiing, airport fees. The 717 had cycle costs approximately 40% lower than a comparable regional jet. This allowed more flights per day. More frequency means more schedule flexibility for passengers. More flights per aircraft means more revenue generated per asset. The math was simple, but powerful. There was also an advantage at airports with slot restrictions, like LaGuardia in New York or Reagan National in Washington. At these airports, each landing and takeoff slot is a scarce and valuable resource. Operating a 737 with 160 seats half empty wastes a precious slot. Operating a 717 with 110 full seats maximizes the slot's value. Delta understood that the 717 didn't need to be the best aircraft in any isolated metric. It only needed to be efficient in the specific context of the company's route network. Let's examine the numbers directly, because this is where Delta's strategy becomes indisputable. If Delta had decided in 2013 to replace the entire 717 operation with new aircraft, like the Airbus A220, the calculation would be as follows: $80 million per aircraft multiplied by 88 aircraft. This would result in $7 billion in acquisition alone. Add $25 million in pilot training for the new aircraft type. Add at least $200 million in new spare parts inventory. The total would be close to $7.2 billion. What did Delta actually spend? The leasing contracts over 8 years cost approximately $1.69 billion. Minimal transition training was about $5 million, and the company still saved approximately $150 million by leveraging the MD-90 parts inventory, avoiding stock duplication. The total cost was around $1.54 billion. The net savings was $5.6 billion over 8 years. This isn't a marginal difference, it's a structural competitive advantage. And there's another element that's rarely discussed: opportunity cost. While other airlines were committing significant capital to purchasing new aircraft, Delta maintained financial flexibility. This capital could be allocated to other strategic areas: international route expansion, lounge modernization, technology investment. Why only Delta? The opportunity was open. Any airline could have assumed those leasing contracts, so why did only Delta see it? Delta had the discipline to ignore market perception and focus exclusively on the numbers, and the numbers were clear: profit. The story of the Boeing 717 at Delta isn't about ideation, it's about thinking independently when consensus is wrong. The entire market saw a depreciated asset with no future. Delta saw a financial arbitrage with perfect operational compatibility. The market saw an obsolete aircraft. Delta saw a precise fit for routes that would be marginal with any other aircraft. The difference wasn't in the aircraft, it was in the analysis. Delta transformed what was considered a commercial failure into a multi-billion-dollar competitive advantage. It kept operational costs low while competitors spent significant capital on fleet renewal. It operated short routes with healthy margins while other companies struggled to make those same routes profitable. And it did this not out of nostalgia, not out of stubbornness, but through rigorous financial discipline. Delta is already planning the transition. The Airbus A220 is entering the fleet, but the company isn't in a hurry because as long as the 717 continues generating positive returns, there's no reason to retire it prematurely. Delta will replace it when the numbers indicate, not when the market suggests. That's the difference between strategic management and reactive management, between leading and following. The Boeing 717 was a commercial failure for Boeing, but for Delta, it was one of the smartest decisions the company ever made, because sometimes the best move isn't buying what everyone wants, it's buying what nobody else values.